what John is saying, what Jesus is saying, is people who come to faith because of someone else's experience are blessed. Of course, we have to make it our own experience, ultimately. But are we really any different than Thomas? I mean, yes, it's 2,000 years later. We've learned that it is somehow in our culture silly to believe that there are monsters under our beds, but there are lots of people who believe there are aliens from other planets just waiting to descend and devour us. We live in an age that poo-poos religion, laughs at organized religion as some sort of superstitious institution, and yet the one thing every newspaper has to carry is a horoscope because it is the most read thing in America in newspapers. We live in a culture that looks at us and what we're about to do at the table of Christ with bread and wine and says, you don't really seriously take those symbols all that seriously, do you? But if you try burning the stars and stripes, suddenly symbols become important to them. Nah, we don't doubt at all, do we? There's not a cynical bone in our body. In 2011, living in a post-modern world, I think Thomas would fit in pretty darn well. In Thomas' encounter with the risen Christ, there are a number of things to learn. Jesus doesn't lecture Thomas about his doubts, for one thing. The church ought not to be lecturing people about their doubts or their questions. Instead, what happens? The risen Christ comes to Thomas and meets him where he is with his needs. What was his need? I've got to probe the wounds. Show me the wounds, and then it'll begin to make sense to me. So the first thing Jesus does is says, oh, Thomas, glad you're here. Look at these wounds. The God that we know in Jesus Christ is not a distant God who says, I've got a way of communicating with you and you better get with the act. This God is one who finds us in our strengths and our weaknesses and our questions and our doubts and yes, even our cynicism. In Thomas' case, of course, the doubts revolve around whether or not he could actually touch the wounds. After all, this was an age in which ghosts were walking through doors and various people were being raised from the dead all the time. Anybody, any ghost could be said to walk through a wall. How would you know it was Jesus? How would you know it was the Word made flesh? There would be wounds. Interesting that John says this was the last sign that Jesus offered. A lot of times, when we hear this story described in Sunday school or church, it is done in such a way that opposes faith to doubt. I don't think that's a very helpful reading. It seems to me that the opposite of faith is not questioning. It's not doubt, but apathy. It's shrugging our shoulders and saying, who cares? What does any of it matter anyway? See, Thomas is not a bad guy. He's got real questions about reality and where he belongs in the middle of that reality. So it's significant, I think, that John finishes the appearances of Jesus' resurrection in terms of Easter with this story where Jesus comes into the room and he shows his wounds to Thomas and to the apostles. Interesting that John says that was the last sign that Jesus revealed. A sign, of course, says something about the very nature of God first is to give witness to the resurrection, to be, as individuals, witnesses to the goodness, the compassion, the love of God. In a world in which, if God is ever mentioned, it has to do with tornadoes and wars and destruction and hatred and long ancient rivalries, it's important that the world hear God connected to goodness and compassion and healing. And you know, I kind of find it encouraging that on Easter night, when the apostles were there without Thomas, they received the Spirit, and they were empowered to go out and preach the gospel, and they preached to Thomas, one of their own, and he still didn't believe. Haven't we all had frustrations trying to live our own understanding of a faithful life, a life faithful to God and goodness, and yet things don't seem to work out? It's so tempting for some to listen to someone when they say, "Oh, you just don't have the Spirit. You just don't get it." But by then the apostles seem to have gotten it. So maybe we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves when we find it hard to live to Easter hope from time to time, when we find it hard to allow our lives to witness to the power of God's love, a love that conquers death. It's a story that says something to us not only as individuals, but as church. As congregations, we have problems. We have our ups and downs. We try something this way and it doesn't work. We try something that way and it doesn't work. But we keep trying because God is there with us. There's something else about the story of Thomas and this whole idea of being challenged to be witnesses that speaks to me. And that is, I've been talking about how you and I are kind of like Thomas, full of doubt and cynicism, hiding behind locked doors from time to time. It also strikes me that we live in a world full of Thomases. We live in a world, a nation, a culture where people are looking for something good and something true and something beautiful. We live in a world where people just won't believe it until they can actually see it and touch it themselves. And isn't that our task? Isn't that our challenge? To live lives, to be a church in such a way that people see that there is actually something different in Oklahoma City. Something, a different kind of voice in the midst of the Bible Belt. There are people out there who are looking for truth. They are looking for resurrection, even if they don't use the word resurrection. They're looking for some dignity, for some respect, for some sign of love, some hope. And you and I, as the body of Christ, are responsible to give witness to that hope. That's our first task. The second that Jesus gives the apostles is to forgive sins, to bring to a world that is broken with sin and hatred and prejudice and warfare and violence, the power of forgiveness. You can call it mercy or reconciliation or compassion or forgiveness or grace. It's our job to practice grace, to be people in whom others see the power of compassion at work. Why are we here on a Sunday night in a church building that doesn't even belong to us? Because we need each other. Because we know that this resurrection that we believe in, that we try to witness to with our lives, is something that we're all in together. We know, like Thomas, who came to that upper room on a Sunday night, having been told something that seemed to him pretty far-fetched by his best friends, that there still had to be something meaningful. We know, like Thomas, that we need one another. We know, like the disciples, that it is in a community that the risen Christ is most explicitly and expressly found. And what are the words of Jesus when he walks through that locked door? Peace. Peace be with you. not because you will never suffer, but because you belong to the Creator of the universe, whose love is stronger than death. Because you have linked yourself to a power and to a community and to a spirit that is greater than anything any one of us can ever be by ourselves. To a power that promises to sustain you and all of us. Not only that, but think of those people in that upper room. There was Thomas, who insisted on putting his finger in wounds, and there were others who were like, oh look, Jesus just walked through the wall. I know he's our Savior. It was clear to them, and there were all those other people in between, a wide variety of personalities. There was Peter, who just a few nights before had betrayed Jesus and ran away embarrassed and ashamed. And yet, we know the rest of the story, that all of those individuals with all of their different talents, and yes, all of their different fears and anxieties, become agents of love and reconciliation.